All right, off we go. So, welcome. This is our fifth episode of Sit and Sit with Dr. Megan Rose, and today we're discussing the divine self. So, for those of you who were with me last week, thank you for coming back and for sticking with us. Many of you, every single week these past 5 weeks. Welcome. And for those that this may be your first sit and sip, there's a lot that we've covered. I'll review a little bit of it, and you can always go back to my YouTube channel. Which is Dr. Megan Rose. And I'll post that in the comments here. Or maybe Viv, if you can pull that up and post it in the comments. My YouTube channel basically has all of these on there, and they'll be there in perpetuity. Okay, so like I said, this is week 5 of a 6-week series that arises out of my years of research and practice as a practitioner scholar of esoteric spirituality and religion. So today we're going to go for about 45 minutes as usual, and then at the end I'm going to be sharing more about my another way for you to learn about the divine self, and talking a little bit about the upcoming course that I have that's launching. So stay tuned until the very end. And I promise that I'm going to stay on at the end and answer any questions that you have. If it's anything really important that you may want to make sure doesn't get lost in the thread, save it till the end. And that way we can make sure that we see it at the end and it gets addressed. So I always like to start with a powerful quote. So today our quote is from psychologist, pagan scholar, and Wiccan high priestess, Dr. Vivian Crowley. And she says, "Spiritual knowledge is something that unfolds from within us, from accessing that deeper layer of the mind that is the collective unconscious, containing the full repository of all human knowledge, past, present, and that which is yet to be revealed. Access to this timeless zone comes from learning the techniques of meditation and finding an interior stillness within ourselves where we commune with the divine and hear the voice of the spirit penetrating the veil between the conscious and unconscious mind. It is achieving this connection with the deeper levels of the divine self within us that is the root of earth-centered spirituality." So I just want to say that again because I feel it's so important. It's achieving this connection with the deeper levels of the divine self within us that is at the root of our earth-centered spirituality. Issues of power, control, and domination of human beings by others are important to pagans. People no longer want to be told by an elite power group what to think and believe. Instead, we must find new sources of authority by developing links with the voice of our own inner divine core and recovering the wisdom deep within us. Contact with and exploration of the worlds of inward reality have always been one of the goals of mysticism. It is a goal with a clearly defined end, that of becoming at one with goddess or god, or other, of finding the divine self, which is present within us all, and of uniting our external personality with this divine center. So that was a little bit of a long quote, but ultimately what Dr. Crowley is saying is that at the core of earth-centered spirituality is stepping into our divinity, our God, goddess, other self, divine self, and allowing that, and we'll talk about this in a second, to permeate, as we talked about when we talked about animism, our seeing the God, goddess, divinity in everyone and everything around us. So here's another quote, and this is from my book that's coming out in March. "Entheosis is any spiritual process that connects us to that connects an individual to a divine or rarefied aspect of themselves and helps to bring the mundane human consciousness into greater awareness and dialogue with the divine or transpersonal aspect, perhaps even allowing them to embody this consciousness as their way of being in the world." So how about that? We'll get into this idea a little bit more today, so stay tuned. So for those of you who are just joining us, you're tuned in to Sit and Sip with Dr. Megan Rose, and this week we're discussing the divine self. So I'm Megan, and I have a doctorate in East-West psychology from the California Institute of Integral Studies, and I have a master's degree in religion and society from the Graduate Theological Union. I'm an initiated ceremonial magician, a Shakta tantric practitioner, and a fairy seer. And I also serve as an ordained interfaith minister and psychospiritual counselor in the San Francisco Bay Area and beyond. So today we're diving into a topic that is integral to spirit marriage and that I've been studying for well over 20 years now. And that is the topic of the divine self. But before we go there, let's just recap what we've discussed in our last, 4 sit and sips now, because each of these chats builds upon the other. So over the last 4 weeks, we've laid the foundation for today's talk. We've explored the ideas of normalizing the paranormal, animism and reenchantment, spirit marriage, and last week we talked about conscious evolution and co-creation. So we first discussed how we need to decolonize our ways of knowing and constructing knowledge and really reconsider and rethink our ideas about what is normal versus paranormal. And then we talked about how Earth is a living, breathing intelligence full of animate, intelligent life at all strata of consciousness, and how we can re-enchant our lives, bringing the enchantment back into our lives by becoming a participant in the cosmos rather than just an objective observer, and how we can do this through story, through myth, and embracing the mystery. Then we talked about developing intimate bonded relationships with otherworldly or paranormal beings, what I call spirit marriage. And finally, we discussed the evolution of our species and how we evolve ourselves via these co-creative relationships with our other than human allies. So it's been a wild ride with lots of amazing topics. And today we're going to explore a topic that flows out of these first 4 sit and sips. Some folks may feel like spirit communication is difficult, confusing, or it's just not their thing. But divine self-communication, that's something that everyone can do. So before we go into divine self, I'm just going to check here and see if there's any lingering questions from last week. You can type them in the chat that folks want to ask before we dive into today's topic. I see that Viv put the YouTube in there. Thank you so much, my dear. Yeah, Entheogens, such a worthy goal. Absolutely. It really is stepping into our divinity. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that can sound kind of like hoity-toity, highfalutin, and it's really not, because when you really understand what your divine self is, it's just a natural outflowing of who you're here, who you're meant to be here. And that's, unique to you. It's as unique as your fingerprint. So let's start with a question. Did you know, right? To be able to take action steps, you have to know that we each have a divine self that we can not only awaken, but embody. So after years of researching spirit marriage, I realized that union with the spirit may not just be about marrying a being external to yourself, sort of an out there thought, being thought of as out there. We also have a divine self, a part of us that sits above. I'm going to put above in air quotes and go back to that, our higher or wise self, and is embedded within the larger entity of the deity, or the larger intelligence, consciousness of the deity. Think of it as being a finger on the hand of the god, goddess. We're that fingertip reaching into the world that is connected to this beautiful body, or this beautiful constellation of being that is divinity. And so we're the individual expression of the greater whole. I call the process of awakening our divine self entheosis, as in entheos, God or goddess within, or entheogen, an agent which awakens the divine within. So entheosis, then, is the art and process of awakening that rarefied aspect of yourself that is fully sovereign and empowered by your soul's fullest potential and expression. In fact, union to your divine self may even, I think it might even be a necessary step in spirit marriage. For how can we really step into divine union with an extraordinary being if we haven't fully claimed our full self, our sovereignty, and the knowledge that we are worthy of the love of a divinity? We'll talk a little bit more about that, but I want to just say that one of the pitfalls that I think happens is we think that divine or extraordinary beings are so far above or so elevated from us. And they certainly have qualities and aspects that are beyond our ken, that are beyond what we can process. But they do things that we can't, and we do things that they can't. And so we have a tremendous amount of potency and power in this relationship, and it really behooves us to lay claim to that and to step into that. And that actually becomes a really great discernment tool for us. So I wanted to talk to you about above versus below, because we talk about like the divine self and the higher or the wise self. Higher self, I think, is a little more problematic because we think of it as like up there. And I really want to get us out of thinking of above below, because although we as humans have to orient to above below because of gravity, when you think cosmologically, it's not necessarily so. If you are not in a physically embodied state, there isn't necessarily an up, down, left or right, forward, backward. You know, you sort of get into the wibbly wobbly, timey-wiminess of quantum mechanics, which I am by no means an expert in, so I don't claim expertise in quantum physics, but I know enough to know that the rules of past, present, future, up, down, in, out really kind of get overturned in those realms. And so I think it's really important for us to get ourselves out of this hierarchical idea of, divine being up there, like this, deity in the sky, and more of a unimpeded, fully vitalized, flowing, and activated human being. And we'll talk about my definition of divine in a few minutes. So I think Orion Foxwood reaches this in a quote from The Fairy Teachings, is I believe the book this came out of. Orion, I'm sorry if this is in the Tree of Enchantment. I didn't write down which book it's in, but it's in one of his books, and they're both fabulous. You should read them both. So Orion says, the physical body is a soul unto itself. It is the living crossroads that mediates the lunar tides of the dreamwalker from below and the stellar powers of the starwalker from above, and bears these forces into the surface world. It's imprinted with powerful ancestral and fairy forces and ancient stellar intelligence. These forces move through your body in your breath, electrical currents, and blood, and are recorded in your flesh and in your bones. I call these potent forces the gods of the flesh. They lay sleeping in your surface walker until they are intentionally awakened, opened up through trauma, or awakened through other experiences of altered states. The body itself, this thing that we're all dancing around in, is the temple of ancestral wisdom and the gateway to the path of spiritual truth. I love that quote. And I won't get too much into fairy seership, the concept of the dream walker, the surface walker, and the star walker, which at first blush can sound very under surface and upper world. And that is certainly one of the ways that fairy seership and the fairy faith cosmology orients, but it's not a upper good, lower bad. It's a totality where in our physical form we orient, where we go deep into the earth to connect the fairy forces, to connect to the dreamwalker, to connect to the ancestors, or we go up into the cosmos forces where we connect to the star walker. So as I track it, the star walker is like our divine self. It's that part of us that holds the blueprint of our mission here on earth, the energies, flavors, and expression of who we are in our fullest, most empowered state. And we each have this, right? Whether you're aware of it or not. We each came here, to paraphrase that often used quote by Marianne Williamson, right? We came here to manifest this glory, this magnificence, this awe-inspiring fabulousness that is our unique self. And it's, again, as unique as your fingerprint. Sometimes we get really stuck in cosmologies or pantheons and saying, well, I'm working with this pantheon, so it's got to be this deity or one of these sorts of deities. And in my course, we'll talk about this in much greater depth, but that is one way of orienting to it. But in other traditions, which we'll talk about here in a sec, it is as unique as your fingerprint. Like finding your deity is a totally unique and totally open field of potentiality. So just want to put that out there so you can kind of cook with it. So don't get trapped into thinking that this all has to look like rainbows and Skittles or one kind of deity, because the divine self has many flavors. Just think of your various mythologies, right? There are gods and goddesses that express all kinds of attributes, and they aren't always all love and light, right? Or pink fairy wings. Some of them, some of them are downright fierce. But you know what? Hey, folks, that's because it takes all kinds, right? We need our fierce deities, our gender fluid deities, our, dare I say, transgressive deities, just as much as we need the ones that bring us gentle and calm, right? So there are so many deities that, that you can kind of, what I recommend is more people start with their own core self. Like, what do they feel are their motivations in life? What are they drawn to? First of all, you could start with, like, what is the pantheon that you're drawn to? Greek, Irish, African. You can sort of look at these different pantheons and feel where you're pulled, maybe because of your ancestry, maybe because that there are stories that have been sort of your own personal mythology that has been haunting you, or hovering on the periphery for your life. And we talked about this when, I think it was in our first or second Sit and Sip when I talked about Storied Lives, which is a book by Dr. Craig Chalquist, one of my teachers. And he talks about finding your personal mythology. So finding your personal mythology can often help you find who your divine self is, or what flavor of the divine self you're expressing as. And something that I'd like to say about deity and cross-culturally deity is that, so for example, say you have a river goddess, and in an African context, she might show up as Ochun, and in, a Celtic context, she might show up as the washerwoman, or, you get what I'm saying. So, like, there's different names, but there's still, like, river deities, or there's still elemental beings, depending on the tradition that you're working in. And the analogy that I like to use is you have, like, a police officer. So a police officer, we understand, upholds the law. That's sort of the universal idea of what a police officer does. But the law that they uphold in Japan is different than the law that they uphold in San Francisco, which is different than the law that they uphold in Scandinavia. So you have, like, the function, but then the unique laws, the unique land, the people that they're interacting with are vastly different based on the cultural context. And so that's how I like to think of deities that have certain functions that they do cross-culturally, but then are specific to those locations. So that's just a little bit of an aside. So is any of this resonating with you? What deities do you feel most drawn to? Do you feel drawn to, like, hunter, warrior, lover, underworld, trickster, jester, queen? I mean, there's so many different flavors, as Anne is saying, that you can start thinking of them as archetypes, and actually you're getting closer to what Carl Jung actually meant when he came along with the idea of archetype. Archetype wasn't this abstract thing. It was actually these embodied intelligences, right? Because Jung was super mystical. And I talk about him a tiny bit in my book, and we'll talk about him a little bit more today when we talk about individuation. But he understood that these archetypes were actually these intelligence beings that held these roles like police officer or lawgiver or keeper that transcended cultural context and then manifested in their cultures as whatever their unique names and expressions were. Yeah, so we've got some folks that are into the Trickster. Oh, what a surprise, Max. You're into the Trickster. Max was at my house a couple of weeks ago, cat sitting for me, and when I came home, there were googly eyes stuck all over the house on different things. Oh, yeah, I'm going to show this to you right now. Can you see this? So here's my microphone. Hopefully you can keep hearing me talk. Okay. So, Trickster, yeah, right? Hayoka, Quinn is saying, Viv is saying the love, sex, and war goddesses, Inanna, Lilith, Ashura, Karen is saying, gods of light, Aaron is saying, creator gods and sex gods. Yeah, cool. So, here's another thing. It's not just about us humans, right? Remember, animism. So Vivian Crowley also says that, quote, the divine is present within us as well as in the world outside and beyond. Jean Hardy, in her book, Psychology with a Soul, Psychosynthesis and Evolutionary Context, explains, in transpersonal psychotherapy terms, the search for spiritual meaning is also the search for the self, the god or goddess within, which is linked to the soul of the world. So Vivian goes on to say, the discovery or recovery of the self, for it is always there. It is what Carl Jung described as the process of individuation, right? This is the process of becoming who and what we really are. Individuation is becoming what we were meant to be from the beginning in order to find the self, the wiser and deeper part of ourselves. We must make a spiritual journey. This is the process of a spiritual initiation. So in a sense, all spiritual longing and search for meaning is a quest to come into knowledge and conversation with this divine self, this divine aspect of you that is in you and that is all around you, right? Sometimes we may start out seeking the beloved, right? Our spirit companion, only to discover that the one that we are seeking, the being that we're actually falling in love with, is in fact our own rarefied self. And sometimes seeking the divine self opens us to other types of extraordinary relationships like a spirit marriage. So personally, in my experience, it's a both and. I write about this when I share my story in my book, that I was going through this entheotic process of learning and coming into relationship with my divine self, while at the same time I was having this spirit coming and wanting to marry me. And I was really trying to navigate both of these things, which I didn't have very clear parameters for. And sometimes I was wondering, is this divine self my spirit spouse? Is it one and the same? Are they separate? What's going on here? There was a lot of ambiguity. And I know that resonates with some of you, because some of you have shared with me privately that, you've had a similar questioning. Is the divine self the same as the spirit spouse? And I would say it's a both and, depending on the tradition that you're working in and depending on how you want to orient to it. In the Shakta tradition, the Shakta Tantric tradition, which we'll talk about in a second here, it's kind of both. You are usually in a relationship with your devotional or your divine self deity, and you're often married and stepping into union with them. So we see this search for the divine self happening cross-culturally. Many of the traditions that practice spirit marriage also include the concept that one has a personal deity that functions for some like a patron saint, and for others it's like a wise or higher self. So I believe that spirit marriage may not be solely limited to the practice of uniting with a foreign or an externalized entity, but might also include the practice of union with one's divine self. Now, there are some who would totally disagree with me, and based on their tradition and lineage and how they work with that being and their practices around it, that's valid. But what I will say is that's not a cross-cultural truth, meaning there are examples in other traditions and other cultures where one can both marry and embody their divine self. So here's a few examples that I've come across in my research that have practices surrounding a divine self. So in British traditional witchcraft, elevation to the third degree, or the creation of a high priest or priestess, can initiate a descent of the god or goddess head. It's a kind of a divine self-embodiment that often hastens the taking of a new spiritual name. In Shakta Tantra, the search for your Ishta Devi or Deva, or sometimes Devata, Ishta Devata, is that is one's chosen devotional deity. And that search for the Ishta Deva or Devi is really a search for the divine within, or the divinity expressing itself through you, and also the divinity that you orient all of your sadhana or your spiritual practice around. They become your focal point. Similarly, in the Vodou and the Haitian Vodou and the New Orleans Voodoo traditions, the concept of the Metet is one's patron saint or deity, and it's the Loa that you are here both to express and to serve. In the tradition of ceremonial magic, this is called achieving knowledge and conversation with the Holy Guardian Angel, or HGA for short. It's a rather lengthy process of finding one's divine name and identity, which I like to liken to finding like a needle in a haystack, because each divine name or the name of the Holy Guardian Angel is unique to you. Again, it's that fingerprint analogy. And so you know, there's a whole ritual and a whole process that we'll talk about more when we unpack this in the Spirit Marriage course. So each of these examples have a lineage-specific spiritual technology that one can engage in for cultivation of some kind of personal indwelling of the divine. Pretty exciting. So I'm curious, how does that sit with you? Have you had any entheotic or divinity awakening experiences? What precipitated them? Was it trance? Was it an entheogen? Drop a comment in the comments field, and I'll go back and look at those in a second. All right. Jonathan is saying angels and priestesses. And Aaron's talking about psychosis. Yeah, psychosis can be, or a kind of dismemberment of the mundane personality can be kind of a side effect of going through some of this. And as I've said, I am not a clinical psychotherapist, so I can't really speak to the DSM diagnoses of, you know, spiritual emergence versus a psychosis or a spiritual emergency. But I do recommend Stan Groff's material on spiritual emergence versus spiritual emergency, because there's a fine line there sometimes. So Quinn's saying that she felt her true essence on ayahuasca. Yeah, she felt united with the divine self. That's actually really common for people to have on entheogens. Ayahuasca. So an entheogen is what used to be called a psychedelic, but there's a reframe going on around that, connected with a lot of the decriminalized nature efforts, and that is to understand these agents, these entheogenic agents, these substances that awaken within us divine and unitive consciousness as being sacred medicines and plant spirit medicines. Okay, so This type of spiritual technology, like I've said, I prefer the term entheosis to talk about this. And again, it's from the Greek root entheos, or God within. And that's because some of the other terminology can get a little muddy. So I offer that entheosis is any spiritual process that connects an individual to a divine or rarefied aspect of themselves. And in so doing, it helps to bring the mundane human consciousness into greater awareness and dialogue with the divine or transpersonal aspect, perhaps even allowing them to embody this consciousness as their way of being in the world. That is a repeat of the quote that I said earlier on. But to avoid the common pitfalls of ego inflation and false claims to enlightenment, which often accompany people saying, I'm in my divinity, I think we need to first redefine the term divine, right? In the context of entheosis, I offer that divinity is not a state of transcendent perfection, typified by the three ohms: omnipotence, omniscience, and omnipresence, that we in theological circles talk about as attributes of the divine. What I offer is that the human divine is the fully realized potential of an individual or a group that has devoted itself to the greater good in both themselves and in their communities. And in this context, to awaken the divine within is to be fully human and yet in conscious contact with one's divine self, with that rarefied aspect of yourself, which has been, here in the West, it's been called a lot of different things. So Aristotle called this aspect of the self the entelechy. MacGregor Mathers called it the holy guardian angel. Carl Self called it the true or the individuated self. And in more recent transpersonal psychology terms, it's been called the unique self and the universal self. We talked about that a little bit last week when we talked about Barbara Marx Hubbard and the universal self, the homo universalis, right? So here's the important bit. I believe that the realization of the divine self, the entheotic state, is not an unprecedented experience reserved for only an exceptional few people. Right? It's not just reserved for the monks that are sitting in the caves meditating in the Himalayas, right? I offer that the divine self is the intended birthright of all people on this planet at this time. Yeah, so that's what we're here to do. That's what the project of conscious evolution and co-creation, it's the underpinning or the outcome, the ultimate outcome, I think, of spirit marriage. It's for us to be in this embodied state. And next week, we're going to talk about the hidden or the secret self, or what Orion calls the dream walker. And that is the part of us that gets really rooted and juicy and connected down into our root and down into earth, and where we draw the vitality, the kundalini, the shakti, the erotic energy up. And we need both, right? We need the blueprint or the big picture of who we're here to be in the world, what kind of force or flavor we're here to embody. And then we need the power, the potency, and the vitality to draw up, right? And then spread that out, circulate that out as who we are here to be. So we're going to talk about the second half of that process next week. And we're going to go in much deeper on both of those processes, the integrative processes in the Spirit Marriage course. So I'd love to hear what you've received so far. Any insights or gems or breakthroughs? It's all welcome. Take a moment, put things in the chat, ask any question. And I'll take a moment and I'm going to look through the comments and see if there's anything being added. So Karen says that they experience that entheotic state through trance, journeys, entheogens, trauma, and dreams. Oh, interesting. At least I think that's what you were saying, Karen. Yeah, so Erin's saying that she misses her divine self. And there can be a longing, a soul longing, a deep memory of what it was like to be in connection or be in full consciousness with that part of ourself. And then the sadness of having been separated out, because when we embody, we tend to forget. We get kind of like temporary amnesia, but then also like all the conditioning that we go through, right? Not only just the trauma, but just the conditioning of culture and family and life can kind of force us to forget. And so a lot of, the spiritual technologies that are out there are really there to help us remember, literally remember, kind of put it back into place. Viv says that they're really, really excited to dive more into the HGA, into marriage with the divine self. Yeah, super juicy. And yeah, and Aaron's saying, I always felt like our soul was but a piece of a greater soul or God. Exactly. Our soul is the fractal. If you think of it from like a fractal geometry, we're one fractal on the bigger picture. And what's exciting and what's kind of groovy is like there are other fractals, what sometimes people call soul family, that are like expressing similar energies or here to do certain projects that we're here to do them with. And it's awesome because it's often because we're like sort of embedded within that divine monad or soul group together. So thank you so much for your shares. Give me a thumbs up or type an aha if you've had an aha today, if you felt like something shift, even if it's like a 1 degree shift in how you're thinking about some of this. It would be great to know that, because a 1 degree shift is such a powerful shift. The example that's often used is a ship that's setting out from like, let's say the San Francisco, and it's on its way to Japan. And it seems like it's a really far distance, and, it's got all this distance, right, to get there. But from a navigation perspective, just being 1 degree off in your navigation, you can end up in a totally different place than where you intended. Like you're San Francisco, you're trying to go to like Tokyo, and you can end up somewhere else somewhere else in Japan, maybe even somewhere else on the on the continent of Asia. So just a 1 degree shift in our thinking or our understanding about something can actually make quite a difference in the long term. All right. So I want to share, I want to take a moment to do some Q&A at the end and talk to you a little bit about the course for those of you that haven't heard about what I'm offering yet. But I want to tell you a story first. One of my very first clients years ago shared this with me. She said she'd been seeing a classical therapist who'd been very helpful, but it seemed like there were blocks inside of her that were having trouble budging. And words alone, like talking it out, just wasn't enough. It just wasn't the right medicine that would clear up the wound. She was really impatient with life, and she was frustrated that life wasn't moving in the direction that she wanted it to on her timeline, her timetable. And nobody was really paying attention to the script that she had in her mind. She knew at a deep level that she was procrastinating, and procrastinating specifically on doing some of her own self-work. And then she met me, and she came to me, and we began working together. And she says that as a result of us working together, she says that her sense of wonder and the wonder of life and its amazing, surprising serendipity returned. She is no longer fearful about not being in control and of not knowing what's headed her way. And those fears have been replaced with the knowing that she's not alone, that she has many beings helping her, so that in the event of a seemingly negative situation arising, eventually she's able to see the positive from it. She's learned many techniques that have enabled her to enjoy life more, slow down, and better manage her mind and its thoughts. She's learned to forgive herself, embrace the parts of herself that she is less than enamored with, because aren't there always parts of us that we're less than enamored with, right? And now she enjoys them as gifts that are helping her. As a result, with working me, she worries less and laughs more, and she lives with abundant faith that rather than cowering and paralyzing fear of what if, all the aspects of her life feel in flow, and she respects the universe's pace rather than trying to demand her own, which she now sees as just what puts her out of the flow when she's trying to make demands. She loves herself in her entirety and is now acutely aware of when she's self-sabotaging, and she's got the tools to stop the self-sabotage. So in short, she found her divine or rarefied self. Pretty cool, huh? Yeah. So this is why I do what I do. It's why I'm so passionate about helping folks, because I want you to find this kind of normalization, grounding, and sense of security with yourself, with your rarefied self, and your contacts as well. It's why I've dedicated over 20 years of my life to educating and supporting people in cultivating extraordinary relationships and navigating paranormal experiences. So I've shared with you some powerful information that these past few weeks, I've shared it with you about normalizing the paranormal, animism and re-enchantment, spirit marriage, and conscious evolution. And I've done all of this with the hope that in it, you'll find the kind of normalization, coherence, and grounding in your own extraordinary experiences. But let's be honest here, it's gonna take more than just a few 1-hour Facebook Lives to truly cultivate grounded, intimate relationships with your divine self or with another worldly being. So I'd like to share how we can work together to help you expand upon and deepen what you're learning here in these sit and sips, okay? And some of you heard this last week, but I've got a little update, which I'll tell you in a minute. So I want to support all of you in feeling grounded, safe, and sane in your paranormal and otherworldly experiences, and inspired and supported to reach to your divine self. Last week, I opened the doors to my first ever online course on spirit marriage. It's called Spirit Marriage 101, Cultivating a Bonded Relationship with an Otherworldly Being. And that otherworldly being could even be you, like a rarefied version of you. So it's a 6-week course during which we'll not only explore spirit marriages with external beings, but also divine union with your own divine self. So don't be worried if you don't have the spirits banging on your door trying to get your attention, wanting to marry you. You can also begin with this divine archetype, this divine part of you. And I honestly think that the divine self-union work is just another form of spirit marriage anyway. So this course is an opportunity for you to get never-before-released information on spirit marriage, drawn from my years of research and practice. You'll get content from my forthcoming book and some great one-on-one community support in your practice and inquiry into cultivating a spirit marriage. Community support. That's a big one. It's a big one for me and for us, because a lot of us have felt really isolated in these practices. So perhaps the spirits have been ringing your doorbell and are asking for a deeper commitment. Or maybe you've already married a spirit, but would love to be able to talk about it more openly in a safe container with like-minded folks who support and uplift you, as well as get some additional tools to deepen your relationship. It's all about community, right? Maybe you're just curious about this topic and something about it resonates with you and you want to learn more and perhaps get to know your divine self blueprint. Great, then this course is for you. But I want to be clear, although I do have a PhD in psychology and a master's in religion, and I have years of training and experience as a psychospiritual guide, I am not a psychotherapist or a licensed mental health clinician. That means that if you're currently experiencing distressing mental health issues, which make it difficult for you to communicate clearly, focus, show up and participate, or hold space for others in the course, and you're not currently under psychiatric or psychotherapeutic care with someone, then this course is probably not a good fit for you. Make sense? Okay. So, here's the juicy bits. This course is going to teach you how to deepen with an existing spirit contact or how to reach to a new one, cultivate a sense of agency, sovereignty, and personal transformation through your spirit communications, discern the desired contact from the undesired one, Devote yourself to a depthful spirit relationship, which could also be your divine self, and discipline your magical body. You're going to walk away with a solid foundation of knowledge about spirit marriage and the divine self, a practice that awakens the divine self called Entheogens. You're going to get that. Tools and exercises for further cultivating these types of relationships. Key practices for undertaking your own spiritual union. And the feeling of being empowered, assured, and confident that you can navigate these realms safely and sanely. Each week, we're going to do a pre-recorded video presentation from me. You'll get that. And then a few days later, we're going to all meet on Zoom for our group session. And everything is going to be recorded. So if you can't be there live, which I know some of you are tuning in from overseas internationally, it's okay because you'll still be able to participate in the Facebook group, and you'll be able to watch the group sessions. And you can always ask questions or make requests in the group for me to cover things in our next group meeting. And you can reach out to me privately. So here's what's included in the course. 6 pre-recorded live video presentations, 6 weekly live Zoom group meetings, a robust workbook that is going to help you deepen with all these practices, access to the private Facebook group where we're going to be able to build some fun community. And you'll also get a 60-minute one-on-one coaching session with me where I'm going to really customize the tools and practices that you're learning to your unique circumstances and what you're really interested, so that it can support you in deepening your spirit beloved connection. So I've calculated it all up, and I realize that the value of this course is well over $2,500. However, I'm really committed to inclusivity and making this material available to a wide range of folks. So I'm offering 3 different levels of enrollment. And you can look more about this on the course enrollment page, when I will put here in the chat in a second here. But I have 3 levels, and very quickly, the student level is $500. And again, all of this is really worth $25, but I'm offering my students a significant discount because I really want just to get this material out there, and I want folks who've been contacting me for years about this material to be able to participate. So we've got our student level, it's $500, and you can pay up front and save $25 or make 3 monthly payments. There's a scholarship level where I have a limited number of scholarships, and they're partial scholarships for those set aside for those in need of financial assistance. And you'll need to fill out a scholarship application for those. And you can pay the $250 up front, or you can also do that in a 3-month payment plan. And those are subsidized by our next level, which is our sponsor level. So sponsors are folks that want to support the community. And so they pay for their own enrollment, and they also sponsor a portion of the scholarship students. And again, with the sponsor level, it's $750. You save $50 if you pay up front, or you can do 3 monthly payments. And the reason I'm doing this is because I really believe in community support and upholding each other, asking for help when we need it, and offering help when we have it to give. And I've been in both places. I've had to ask for scholarships and receive those from, school and a variety of different places, different trainings that I've done. And I've also been in the position of being able to sponsor people. And also just being in the middle there. There's, no judgment. It's all about being able to enter into this as a cohort together where we've got each other's backs. So there's also some really exciting bonuses that I've thrown in, and one is a class on Entheogens called Awakening the Divine Awakening the Divine Self, Cross-Cultural Technologies for Awakening the Divine Within. There we go. That's the name of it. And that is an hour-long standalone class that you'll be able to watch and learn more about those cross-cultural technologies that I talked about earlier. So I totally believe in what I'm offering, and so I guarantee all my courses. If you participate wholeheartedly the first week and do the work, but don't feel like you're getting anything out of it, then you can email me, and I will refund your money. But here's the deal. I just made this announcement and opened the class last Thursday. Just in the past 7 days, I've had an almost overwhelming response to this course. Kind of blew my mind. People from all over the world are actually signing up. And to be honest, the course is already almost half full. So I really am intentionally limiting the enrollment so that we can create a safe and intimate group together and really foster community and trust. So if you think that this is something that you're interested in, I really encourage you to apply as soon as possible. The enrollment will continue to go through October the 14th, but I can't guarantee if you wait till the last minute that there'll be space available, because at some point I'm just going to have to say no to folks because it's going to get too big. So there we go. So that's where things are at today, and I'm putting the link in the chat right now so that you can go directly to the enrollment and the enrollment process. And yeah, that's it. So next week is our final sit and sip, right? We've made it through to week number 6 almost. So we're going to be diving into the juicy and tantalizing world of ecosexuality, and spirit sex. Okay. So until then, you can DM me with any questions you have from any of these sit and sips we've done. And if you don't want to put them in the public chat now, you can DM me. But otherwise, I'm going to stay on now for a few minutes. We're a little over 45 minutes, but that's okay. I'll stay on till 6 if you have any questions or comments or anything you want to respond to. So thank you so much for joining me again today. I'll see you next week, and many, many blessings to you. Mwah.